David, we've got a very interesting show planned for everyone today. How are you this morning?
I'm very well, Jason. It's good to be with you.
I always become confused because in your time zone it's morning and here it's afternoon. So good day, David. Welcome to the show.
Or as the Aussies say, good day, mate.
Right. Good on ya is another one that they sometimes say.
Yeah.
Now, David, you're presenting us today with a rather remarkable topic. We're talking about how, well, at least the possibility, did BBC hand off Kobe Bryant to Trump-powered SERCO air traffic control? Now, some people might see that and be quite curious about what we might be referring to. What can you tell us, David, about that topic, what we're going to discuss today, and most importantly, what we'll be covering in 1 hour when we make the transition over to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth.
Well, thank you, Jason. We've got an extraordinary series of connections that I believe we can demonstrate that the BBC's relationship with RCA, Radio Corporation of America, in World War II, that was centered around the development by RCA of two very powerful transmitters that they couldn't sell in the United States for Federal Communications Commission objections. I don't know exactly why that happened, but I think they had two 250 kilowatt transmitters that they couldn't sell in the States. So the BBC sent over an engineer, whose name I forget, to buy them and bring them to the United Kingdom for an amazing piece of what's called black propaganda. The idea of the Brits was that they would wait until the Germans switched their radio transmitters off to avoid them being used as homing beacons for RAF bomber raids over Germany. And at exactly that moment, as the German radios were switched off, the Aspidistra transmitter, which was then ramped up to 1 megawatt, would be switched on, and fluent German speakers employed or deployed, if you will, by the BBC, would then inject fake news or black propaganda into Germany, declaring that they were a German radio station. And it was very, very persuasive. And when the Germans tried to switch to female operators, the Brits found some German-speaking females, and they popped them in. And apparently, these two organizations would be screaming at each other, "Get off the air! We're real!" Right? And so the German population, particularly in the Berlin area, I think it was Goebbels, he said, "These Brits," he didn't use my words, "are bloody cute because they're actually monitoring the bombing damage, relaying it back through the Aspidistra transmitter, and so that the Germans being bombed would recognize that whoever it is that's telling them they're being bombed knows exactly where the bombing is taking place and where it's not taking place." And of course, the German radio, for white propaganda purposes, would be trying to tell the Germans, "Don't worry, everything's okay." But one particular story the Brits injected was during the bombing raids of Berlin, that the Nazis were getting their elites out of town, leaving the peasants to fry, you see. Now that really plays to the gallery, doesn't it? Because isn't that exactly what we're getting in the United States today? The elites are skating the pandemic, etc., while the peasants are dying in large numbers in seniors' homes. So what I'm essentially saying, the premise is the relationship between the BBC and RCA, Radio Corporation of America, and its wholly owned subsidiary in the United Kingdom, RCAGB 1929, persists to this day. That is to say, RCAGB 1929 became SERCO in a management buyout of 1988 and 1989, orchestrated by N.M. Rothschild and Sons Limited, I believe, by Wilbur Ross, Trump's commerce secretary.
He's not well, David. Wilbur Ross was hospitalized this past week.
Well, I don't, wish any harm on him, but he's well past his sell-by date. I'm getting close to it, right? I'm 77 in August.
You're way more fit and lively than Wilbur Ross. I noticed not to interrupt you, David, I'm sorry, but you remember when I spoke to him in December of 2018, he seemed fine. I mean, obviously, I think he was about 80 or something at the time, but I just saw him on TV a few weeks ago, and he just did not seem well at all. And the fact that he's in the hospital now, maybe not a good sign for Wilbur Ross. But real quickly, David, what was the name of this transmitter that they bought from RCA?
Aspidistra. Well, it was called Aspidistra by the British. There's a song by, is it Gracie Fields, the biggest Aspidistra in the world? It's a very famous song. But anyway, during the war, it was broadcasting black propaganda, or sometimes grey propaganda. If I understand correctly, black propaganda is where you say you are someone whom you're not, right? And white propaganda, like Voice of America, says who you are, right? And
well, some that's people very interesting. Sorry to interrupt again, but given what's going on right now with propaganda coming from Black Lives Matters, which ostensibly represents black people, but we're finding out that most of them are white. So therefore, any Black Lives Matter propaganda sort of seems like it might be black propaganda.
Absolutely. This is where we can expose the BBC for what it is. I mean, very talented broadcasters, the biggest broadcaster in the world that broadcasts in 50 languages to a weekly audience of 500 million people. And I sent you just before the show a list of locations where the BBC collects its news, etc., and then it injects it into the global media, onto the global internet. And it's just colossal. That is to say, the BBC can clip in a real-time propaganda release, like Black Lives Matter, with images of George Floyd and a white guy kneeling persuasively on his neck for 8 minutes, 46 seconds. And we've discussed that in the show some way back, right? And then attaching the meme, I think if that's the right word, Black Lives Matter, and sending that to an audience of 500 million people.
Sorry, David. Look at this. The very first property listed, BBC Park Western. The location is Acton. Where is Acton? Is that somewhere in England?
Yes, I think so, yeah.
So also the alias of an individual who frequently trolls this show. That's interesting, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, these names can lead somewhere, but just coming back to this idea of the BBC going into a partnership or a joint venture with RCAGB 1929, for me, RCAGB 1929 are the people who send the signals, right, for example, to the public that there's an incoming intercontinental ballistic missile. That is to say, RCAGB 1929 got the contract from the British government to provide the British with a 4-minute warning. And I'm thinking, well, I wonder who gets that 4-minute warning, like on 911. Who got the 4-minute warning that possibly kept them out of the Twin Towers? Well, there's a guy called Howard Lutnick that you and I know very well. There's also a guy called Chris Hyman, who's the chief executive officer of SERCO, who was in the windows of the World Restaurant for a breakfast meeting with the Risk Waters Group. He gets up, I would say around 8:30, gets into the elevator, goes down to the 47th floor, where there's a meeting of SERCO shareholders. And just to help the audience, maybe you can think of it as a meeting of RCAGB 1929 post IPO shareholders, which include the state of California, which I think is interesting, 3 sovereign governments, which is the United Kingdom, Singapore, and Saudi Arabia, and 10 global custodians with a total of $100 trillion of assets under management, and 2 extremely radical and dangerous and ignorant academic pension funds. Very important, because remember, David Rockefeller said the world is ready to move to a supranational government of an intellectual elite and world bankers. Well, the intellectual, go ahead.
I wanted to show you this, David, because when you mentioned RCAGB 1929, I put that into Google, and the first thing it brings up is oxfam.org.uk. I don't know what you know about Oxfam, but it's talking about music, films, and video games, and it tells us it's going to link to something about RCAGB 1929, but then it just sticks on this white page and doesn't really give us
Right.
any information. But isn't that weird?
Yes. Well, Oxfam, what I'd like to say is I believe there are thousands or 95% of people who go in for these charities. My late father-in-law worked with a charity called CARE in southern Sudan. I think they go in genuinely, but you see, they can be played. That is to say, here are sackloads of rice, right, through some distribution agency, which is a not-for-profit. What people don't understand is if you put sackfuls of free rice into the marketplace, all the little farmers growing rice go bust because you're dumping free rice, right?
Right.
So the little farmers don't have enough money to buy the seed for next year, and famine spreads like a wave, right? So all of these do-gooders, Clinton Foundation and so on, we need to look at them very carefully, not necessarily on the grounds of criminality, although in the case of the Clintons, I think that's very clear, but in the case of naivety. Anyway, backing up. So from World War II onwards, I believe the BBC created and injects propaganda through the medium of what you might call a third-party logistics provider like RCAGB or now SERCO. And SERCO, unfortunately for the United States of America, is the world's largest non-state air traffic controller, with 58 control towers, primarily along the west coast of the United States of America, that would have been in the vicinity of Kobe Bryant's helicopter as it was handed off from Van Nuys, have I got that right?
Van Nuys Airport.
The air traffic, to Sokol, right? And if you look at the transcript, what the Van Nuys says is go to Sokol and switch to another frequency. And I believe there was what's known as a man-in-the-middle attack by the BBC, right, through this Trump interface that's built by SERCO, where the Trump interface actually provides you with a cockpit or a dashboard, or I call it a template, into the Federal Bridge, so you can create a virtual private network for the elites, if you will, to crash Kobe Bryant's helicopter. Now, can I prove it? No, I can't prove it. But look at the bizarre similarities between the attacks on Germany, where the Germans would switch off their radios and the Brits would come in with the Aspidistra transmitter on the same frequency. So basically, the bombers that are delivering the payload into Berlin, they know that the propaganda explaining exactly where the bombs have dropped is going to be amongst the German people. So it's as much about spreading terror and propaganda as it is the physical damage in Berlin. So the BBC and RCAGB, now SERCO, are very good at injecting fake news or fake television signals to vector a helicopter like Kobe Bryant's into the mountainside. Actually, potentially, fly him into the fog. The pilot is disoriented. The pilot is not getting the signals from Sokol, which is transmitting, basically saying, where the hell are you, or you're too low. So who is sending the vectors to that helicopter that ultimately took it with the pilot, probably totally confused, into the mountainside? I think it has to be the BBC World Service through its studios and the list of broadcasters and news collecting that I just sent you, which is global, right, together with SERCO, which is the world's leading non-state air traffic controller. Now, let's just get back to a few other planes that mysteriously crash or disappear. If you take those two Malaysian Airlines planes, right, Flight 370 and Flight 17. So MH Flight 370 flew up to I think it was the Vietnam-Thai border, where there is a waypoint. And my understanding is at the waypoints, the air traffic controller, let's say from Kuala Lumpur, say to the pilot, good night, goodbye, switch to, and the pilot switches onto another frequency, consistent with the frequency from either Vietnam and Thailand. At that point, MH370 is taken off route and starts flying in the border between Vietnam and Thailand. My geography is hopeless, right? out into the Indian Ocean and turns south and heads towards the Diego Garcia, which is a British-owned territory that has been rented out to the American military and incidentally is used allegedly for rendition of people who need a little bit of waterboarding to get them to cough up a bit of information about what the New World Order would like to do with our future.
I saw a documentary about Diego Garcia one time, David. It's really bad what happened. Basically, it's this little kind of like island out in the middle of nowhere where all the people were sort of just like indigenous, like people hanging out there. And the Americans and the British decided it was so strategic in its location and the unique nature of its geography that they should basically just steal it and kick out everybody who lived there. And so they did that.
Right. But I think that plane was flying on a route that was using a patent from Boeing, pre-coordination of return link for handoff between coverage areas being traversed by a mobile transceiver platform.
Is that
essentially that can apply? Yeah, that's a patent, right? And it's 2001-0831. So it was filed, I believe, or priority 31st of August of 2001 by Boeing.
What's
that's
the
pretty interesting.
Name of it or the patent number?
The patent number is US 945089. 945089. And it's on one of the patents in my template at reverse CSI scripts. And if you look at it, right, there are some very important dates in terms of the imminent attack of 911. Because what you see in the patent office is the patents are starting to be aligned, I believe, through the Federal Bridge, so they can be clipped together for a man-in-the-middle attack on the United States on 911.
Somehow that brings up a wheat heater. I don't think that's what we're looking for. US 945089.
Let me give you the name. If you look at pre-coordination of return link for handoff between coverage areas, Boeing patent, and you'll get it there. And this patent, right, would allow Boeing and Boeing's preferred supplier of command control communications, computers, intelligence, and surveillance, which is the British company SERCO, right, to maintain communications during a handoff. And it's to say, to make sure that the receiving or transmitter for the mobile transceiver is on and in communication. Let's say it's a Kobe helicopter or American Flight 11, right, is in communication before the other air traffic controller hands it over, right, because you don't want to go into a gap, right? The problem is this is really vulnerable to what is known as a man-in-the-middle attack, because if you can get in between the two air traffic controllers, you can capture the aircraft and fly it into the target, which is what happened on 911. So it was basically a handoff fraud by the BBC through another patent that we've discussed extensively, and the name of that is the spoken text display method and apparatus for use in generating television signals. And I believe those television signals are the equivalent of what in the 19th century you would call blocking notes. They're instructions to the actors to move into position during a play or an act such that the audience has a clear view and the people are appropriately positioned according to what they're saying. Well, it's exactly the same thing.
Yes, it's very important, David, that the incident be seen, as pointed out in the patent.
And synchronized, right, with other elements that are coming into the crime scene. For example, those elements that are coming into the crime scene to take the evidence away that would tell you that this was a live action role play. So you have, for example, and we've discussed that extensively, the cleanup crew that may have arrived at the helicopter site where the crash of Kobe Bryant, and maybe there was a flight recorder or a transmitter, or they'd modified, I think it was the Sikorsky, and you can find out that Boeing and Sikorsky are working together on an advanced fighter jet, et cetera, et cetera. But the most important thing I think about Boeing from this point of view is that SERCO is the preferred supplier of command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, and surveillance and reconnaissance. And I would say to the Americans, what the hell are you doing outsourcing your most strategic defense electronics and warning systems to the British company, SERCO, given that SERCO has been charged but never convicted with transporting imaginary prisoners electronically tagged? Right?
And there's something important that you shared with me, David, that we should let everybody know about. That's a big part of this connection. It's, you've mentioned to us many times that SERCO is the largest operator of these, contract FAA towers. This was quite an amazing find. You've got this map here of these different FAA contract towers, and California is controlled by SERCO.
You got it. You've got it. So SERCO would have had I'll come back to motive in a minute, motive, opportunity, and weapon to jump into the communications to Kobe Bryant's helicopter pilot, right? And as he switched over to the new frequency, in theory, to link him up to SOCOL, in the transcripts, the SOCOL control tower is saying, where the hell are you? And you're too low or something like that. So presumably they're watching him on radar, but we don't know what the pilot was receiving. I don't think the pilot was receiving any communications from SOCOL. I think he was receiving communications from a proxy SERCO transmitter. And it might have been in an aircraft accompanying the pilot, it might have been a satellite, and it might have been a tower. But I don't think the pilot of Kobe Bryant's helicopter knew that he was being handed off into an ambush.
Right.
And he flew into the mountainside.
The key to an ambush is not letting the people know that they're about to walk into it. The other thing, David, I think,
go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to make sure that people understand where we're talking about. You've mentioned many, many times the Trump interface. And of course,
Yes.
we don't want people to think that Donald Trump himself, at least we have no indication that he had anything to do with any of this, but it is really weird that they've named this trial, usability, maturity process thing, they named it Trump. And this is a SERCO project.
No coincidence. Yeah, no coincidence. And it was hooked up. Now, let me roll the clock back to the 1980s. Arrogantly or otherwise, I claim I built the world's most powerful interface or dashboard or cockpit or template, if you will, into big data for the oil industry. Starting in 1981, when I was I was transferred out of Nigeria. This was at the Schlumberger Research Center in Ridgefield, Connecticut. And I became the coordinator of artificial intelligence and geoscience research. And I worked with a man called Luke Steels, brilliant individual. He had a double PhD in computational linguistics. And I articulated to Luke Steels how I thought human experts interpreted big data in the oil industry. And I asked him if he could build a system that could simulate experts working on big data. So we built basically a pilot system or a proof of concept at Ridgefield. I didn't get the support I felt I needed from Schlumberger, so I quit and went back to the UK, and I started work under a private venture with Rakel Defense Electronics to try and build the system that I knew I could build, having built the proof of concept at Schlumberger.
Was this Hesper, David?
Yeah, so that was the paper I wrote at Schlumberger, and it was an analysis of expert thinking that if you keep going, at the end of that abstract, I said something to the effect, stop, human and system expertise. A comparison suggests that properly designed and applied, an expert system can help its users make well-informed decisions. In the absence of that, the system may prove dangerously misleading and should not be used as a substitute for an accountable human expert. This is 1981, and I'm as mad as hell because now we're heading, 40 years later, and my warnings have not been listened to, because what we're facing now with this pandemic is they're using artificial intelligence and expert systems to simulate the fatalities that they would expect if the algorithms were correct. And the algorithms are wrong. They're not just 100% wrong. In some cases, they're 10,000% wrong. And the guy driving, the charlatan driving that, is Professor Neil Ferguson of the Imperial College COVID-19 response team, who actually goes to Downing Street and he infects Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, who is sidelined off into St. Thomas's Hospital, where he's monitored by an outfit called Veopath or Veopathology, which is owned by SERCO. So the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is lying in a bed being monitored, I believe, through a Trump interface, where he could potentially have been switched into a ventilator, and then it would be the perfect murder, wouldn't it? Because you just adjust remotely the frequency and the pressures of the ventilator, and you've got one dead UK Prime Minister who wanted to adjust the license fees of the BBC. Over to you.
It's very interesting, David. And take a look at this. They're still, like interviewing Neil Ferguson. This is The Guardian from, I think, June 10th. Yeah, this is from just a month ago. But wasn't this guy kicked out like in April or May? Why are they still talking to him? He's a dope.
No, he resigned from some prime ministerial advisory committee, I think, right? But it's still, to the best of my knowledge, he's the head of the COVID-19 response team at Imperial College. And here's where I think it gets really interesting, because going back to SERCO, it has these shareholders, including the University Superannuation Scheme, which covers the retirement benefits for people like Ferguson, and TIAA, which is, I believe, the largest private pension fund in the world. It might be up to $1 trillion of assets under management, which handles the retirement benefits of the likes of Bill and Hillary Clinton, who were on faculty at the University of Arkansas, right? Or Michelle and Barack Obama, who at various stages, I think, were University of Chicago, or even worse and ridiculously, this woman, Bernadine Dawn, who is sworn to overthrow the government of the United States. She had a career at Northwestern University. One of her seminars was Torture, Paradigms and Practice. Go figure. So the American intelligence agencies, I think they've got their head up where the sun doesn't shine. I think with poor Mr. Trump, or poor President Trump, with 18 alphabet soup intelligence agencies, including the Marine Corps Intelligence Activity, that allegedly is funded by a mutual enemy or friend, whatever you like to call him, right? Previously with the CIA. And I believe the CIA after World War II, remember, it was created out of the ashes of the OSS,
yeah,
which was mentored by the Special Operations Executive. And that transition was mentored by Lord Rothschild, Lord Victor Rothschild, who was a very well-known biologist, Churchill's right-hand man, intimate knowledge of Porton Down, the biological research, biowarfare research center, and perfectly capable of generating all kinds of horrible diseases and infections for the purposes of asymmetric warfare. So what I want to say is, I'm proud of being a Brit, but I also want the world to understand the British are superb at asymmetric warfare. You've got this piddly little island, right, that's like a dot on the world map. And if you go back to my reverse CSI scripts homepage, you can see the connection through the all red line around the world. And that was the first underwater connection between, I think, Ireland and Newfoundland, was installed in something like 1848, I think. Right. From then on, the British Empire built redundancy. First of all, with underwater cables, copper cables, to carry telegraph signals.
Had to be quite a technological feat at that time to run that cable.
Major, right. And then giving you the ability to hand off the job of assassinating Abraham Lincoln, for example. Right? You can do it in real time.
So, but the strategic need of the handoff, David, is what? Just so somebody else can do it, to do that man-in-the-middle attack?
To transfer a crime scene setup, investigation, and manipulation in real time to a double-cross agent, right? So that is to say, when the Germans were listening to this material and shutting down their radio stations. They were basically listening to a double-cross communication, which said, the elites are being transferred out of harm's way, leaving the peasants to fry. So, as I understand, there was mass panic amongst the Germans being bombed in Berlin. Or what happened on 911? It's an exact replica of a handoff managed by the same people. That is, instead of RCAGB 1929, it's SERCO, whose shareholders met on the 47th floor of the North Tower on the morning of 911, right, with $100 trillion of assets under management, engaged in what I believe was a criminal insurgency, not a terrorist attack. Terror is an instrument. This is a criminal insurgency aimed at overthrowing the United States government. And I don't mean you collectively, you guys haven't woken up. Neither of the Brits, neither of the Canadians.
Most everyone hasn't.
Almost everyone, but there's a small core of people. And I thank so much the people who sponsor me and sponsor you and help make this possible. But we need, or hope, I think, is a wave of people transmitting this message that the United States, the Five Eyes countries, are being targeted by a criminal insurgency that I call SERCO CAI Phantom Crime Group. And each of those words, obviously, SERCO is an identifiable, suable entity whose shareholders have $100 trillion of assets under management. CAI is an identifiable private equity group with 50 special investors, some of whom are dead, but including, very importantly from 911, the late General Alexander Haig, who interviewed on Fox News at 9 o'clock in the morning. There's a nice convincing gash that could be a plane, basically an aluminum hull, I'll give it the American pronunciation, that allegedly has flown through a building, a steel frame building. No way that can happen from a physical point of view. And General Alexander Haig is asked, who does he think is behind the attack? This is at 9 o'clock before the second plane hits the south face of the South Tower. And he says, well, I don't have the information. I don't want to speculate. Well, that's obviously the preamble to him reading his script. He says, we know where to look. It's the Palestinians or bin Laden group. I mean, wake up, America. When that guy says, former Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, that you're about to be, or, there's going to be some more munitions coming from the bin Laden group, you know that you're the target of a man-in-the-middle attack, or you should know that you're the target of a man-in-the-middle attack, where the command structure of the United States of America has been captured or handed off to double agents controlled through what I would say is the BBC's faculty of fraud. Over to you.
I was just looking here, David. It's really, I don't know if amazing is the right word, but you would think if you typed in Alexander Haig, Fox News, September 11th, that would come up, right?
Yeah.
No.
You have to search for it, Haig Foreknowledge 911, and look at a video, and you get that clip where he's talking presumably to a Fox News reporter. 9 o'clock, 2 minutes before the second plane hits.
Human freedom. I'm having a tough time.
Foreknowledge. Alexander Haig.
Haig Foreknowledge 9/11. Put it in
put
Google
under,
and hit video.
Look him under YouTube or video. Anyway, it's there somewhere because I've looked at it countless times.
We might see it. This might be it.
Yeah, there you go.
That's
Maybe it's worth just playing that.
Actually, we're going to have to play that later because if we play it on YouTube, YouTube can get us in trouble.
Okay, all right, forget it.
But that's part of the reason, David, why we do these sponsor-exclusive shows on Patreon and Subscribestar.
Yeah, so going back to the opening image that you created,
yes,
people might legitimately say, okay, well, we understand how Kobe Bryant's helicopter might have been handed off to a SERCO control tower to be crashed. And then there's a question as to why, but I'll come back to that. What relevance does that have to the attack on 911 in New York? Well, if you open up so we can look at that schematic, over on the right, I believe, it's got an indication of some of the control towers on the East Coast, right, which are not SERCO. But there is a control tower that's yes, over there on the right of that. You can see that the New York is not covered by SERCO. But there is a control tower that's vitally important to the 9/11 attack that I believe was used to hand off those aircraft into their targets. And that is the Cornfield Carrier.
Cruiser.
Right? There it is. The Cornfield Cruiser, right? Now, this is very interesting. We know that SERCO has completely penetrated the command and control systems of the United States Navy. We also know that now this operation is run by Lockheed Martin, i.e. basically it's been privatized.
This cruiser is.
Yes, right? Now Lockheed Martin is an interesting company because it's in a joint venture in the United Kingdom with SERCO and I think it's Jacobs Engineering for the operation of the atomic weapons establishment. Now just think about it. That means you've given a private company whose shareholders include Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom, Singapore, and the two militant teachers' pension funds, the right to manufacture, transport, share, and dispose of atomic weapons technology in the United Kingdom. The Trident missiles, for example. That means to say SERCO could actually present a man-in-the-middle threat to the United States of the release of an atomic weapon or a dirty bomb. So this is crazy. This idea of privatization, you know what we've discussed, I think, in the last show, the idea of state capture?
Yes.
Starting with Vancouver, spreading across to Montreal, Toronto, and New York, I believe the CAI private equity group, potentially a front for the CIA, has captured Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, and New York as the 4 seed points to capture North America and the United States and Canada. Now, let's just look at, for example, the Vancouver CAI private equity group. From 1996 to 2002, it would appear that vulnerable women, First Nations women, were being abducted from the downtown east side, where you and I have went on a stroll, and processed, that's a euphemism, obviously, through the Starnet Communications studios at 425 Carroll Street, where Starnet Communications was alleged to have been engaged in hardcore adult and child pornography and online gaming, up to the time of a raid on the 20th of August of 1999 by 100 law enforcement officers, including 2 SWAT teams, one from the IRS and one from the US Customs, that crossed the border into Canada and took away evidence of hardcore adult and child pornography and online gaming in 60 countries.
They're quite
Where did it go?
But
So?
I mean, Vancouver, the offices are quite close to one another, but to be fair, Vancouver's a pretty compact city, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. And surrounding Vancouver, there are various cities or towns. One of them is Richmond, British Columbia, right?
Uh-huh.
Richmond, British Columbia is the alleged hub for the Phantom Secure Criminal Group or crime group with 20,000 members around the world, right? Mm-hmm. So when that guy Ramos gets arrested, what happens to the 20,000 criminals allegedly using modified Blackberries to secure their communications? Well, if that technology is no longer available to them, they're going to switch to something else. It's my assertion. They switch to Huawei phones, right? Secured, because now you've got the Chinese conglomerate, Huawei, which is facing a RICO charge in the Brooklyn court for the theft of intellectual property. So my assertion is that the Trump template of patented devices has been hijacked by a criminal organization, 20,000 strong, that connects the Five Eyes countries. And when the BBC writes a script, right, let's say they want to remove Kobe Bryant from the scene, to prove what? Well, to prove that they're all powerful. That is to say, they can arrange an incident that results in the death of Kobe Bryant, who's a black guy, and there is no investigation.
Well, but I mean, surely they did not do it just to prove that they're all powerful. Bishop Gators has spoken quite a lot about certain investments and certain pharmaceutical companies that Kobe Bryant had information about, something to do with an opiate lawsuit against a company that was making some kind of diet pill or something like that. But it's also important. It's interesting, David, because this really ties in what you're talking about today, ties in quite a bit with some of the things that Bishop Gators was saying. You've also brought to my attention something that I had kind of forgotten about, which was that on the day that Kobe Bryant died, like I guess it was January or something like that, BBC ran this video, and here's just this person's tweet that I found, which says, "Who cut this?" meaning the video. BBC News using footage of LeBron James instead of Kobe Bryant in their obituary. It even says James on his jersey. So, I mean, at first, it's interesting because, if Donald Trump had done this, or me, or somebody who's not the BBC, put out a picture of LeBron James and said, like, hey, we love you, Kobe, or whatever, that would have been just, the person would be flattened as an absolute racist for not being able to tell the difference between one prominent black man and another. I mean, if Trump did that kind of a mistake, he would just be excoriated. And the BBC, nobody said anything at all about it. How could they make that mistake, David?
Well, maybe it's not a mistake, you see. Again,
Right.
From a propaganda point of view, what is interesting, I believe, from the BBC and SERCO point of view, is to have black people think that white people disrespect them. They don't really care who they are. Or, maybe there's a theory that to white people, all blacks look alike. What we can pick up from this, I believe, is this idea of Black Lives Matter as a meme, I think that's the right word, that is transmitted by the BBC around the world, is meant to give the impression to the world in 50 different languages that white people disrespect black people, right?
Right.
So I believe Black Lives Matter as a meme or a slogan is a classic example of black propaganda, right? Because it begs the question, well, what about white people or yellow people or brown people? You and I've got friends right across the spectrum. I don't personally.
But along the lines of what you're saying, David, it draws people questioning that, what about this life, that life, the other life, into this kind of trap where they're immediately,
Correct.
That becomes inflammatory. You're a hateful racist if you say all lives matter.
So exactly. So what you're doing with the BBC, again, I repeat, it's the world's largest propaganda machine that broadcasts in 50 different languages, right, to an audience, a weekly audience of 500 million people, and a network of news collectors. I showed it in the list I sent you out of Wikipedia today, around the world, meaning they're collecting real-time news and injecting, I believe, maybe many of them unknowingly, black propaganda, and that's the term that comes through from World War II, into the global collective consciousness. So now 500 million people, for all I know, around the world believe white people are racist and the proof they see is, look, there's a white guy with his knee on the neck of George Floyd. But what is taken out of context or removed or withheld is these guys knew each other and they didn't like each other.
And that is so important. It's been totally ignored.
Exactly. Apparently they worked, I think, what's his name? Chauvin, I think his name was.
Yeah.
He worked at a nightclub. I believe he waited outside in a cop car and shook people down if they were fine. And George Floyd was working inside. I believe you visited the restaurant, haven't you?
No,
you've looked at it on the internet.
Google Earth, we looked at it, but I haven't been to Minneapolis in a really, really long time. There was something else that I noticed at the beginning of the show here, David, that was kind of strange. I don't know if you saw this, but when I took a little hop over here to BBC Broadcast House, as we do kind of almost every week, I set the little guy down here in the street view, and no, it's different now. It was showing us the broadcast house at night or during Christmas or something like that. It was weird.
Oh, okay. Well, let's just go back to the BBC. So, because I want to cover that point, I've introduced this term faculty of fraud, right? Now, Faculty of Fraud, for me, is the philosophy, politics, and economics course that was launched at Oxford University in, I think, 1921 or 22. That's about 20 years after the first Rhodes Scholarship were handed out. And if you follow the BBC and philosophy, politics, and economics, you'll find a whole bunch of these people have migrated into the BBC and are playing key roles, I believe, from a point of view of propaganda. One of those is David Dimbleby. David Dimbleby is a well-known newscaster, broadcaster with the BBC, has a great reputation, good gravitas, etc., etc. But he's also a member of the Bullingdon Club at Oxford. And another name for the Bullingdon Club.
What is the Bullingdon Club?
The Bullingdon Club is these aristocratic or very wealthy students who smash up a restaurant, for example.
It's kind of like Clockwork Orange, isn't it?
You got it. And there is a film called The Riot Club, which gives you a flavor of what these people are like. You know, they'll find a tramp and they'll burn £100 note under the tramp's nose. You know,
a homeless guy, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. So, and what they do is, in the shadows, after trashing a restaurant or a pub, there'll be a guy with a bag of money, and he'll say to the proprietor, right, well, how much do you think the damage is worth? Because obviously the proprietor of the restaurant could sue these people for damages, right?
Yeah.
And so he'll have a price. Everyone running a restaurant, you know, they want to get back into business. Let's say there's £10,000 worth of damage. The guy with the money bags from the City of London will give him £20,000 on the condition he keeps his mouth shut. Transfer that up to the Windows of the World restaurant on 911. You've got Christopher Hyman, the chief executive officer of SERCO, is at a breakfast meeting with the Risk Waters Group, which is a British insurance group. He gets up, I would guess, at around 8:30, and he goes down in the elevator to the 47th floor, and he meets with SERCO shareholders, which include a representative, presumably, of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Singapore, United Kingdom, and the two big academic pension funds, TIAA. Go ahead.
Well, I'm looking up Christopher Hyman here because I'm just thinking of something. I remember I was surprised to see that he was, from South Africa, which, correct me if I'm wrong, David, that is a British dominion, right?
Well, it was.
Or Dutch.
Yeah, they got their independence, but it's very interesting you should point out that, because there was apartheid and there were various groups, Nelson Mandela, who allegedly earned the respect of a great deal of people. But at the beginning, you know, he was planting bombs, as I understand it, or overseeing the planting of bombs. But he's worked his way through, and he's a very famous, well-considered individual in the history of race relations. Now, what I'm coming back to is, does the BBC have a real interest in Black Lives Matter? Or is it... Go ahead.
Well, Chris Hyman worked for Arthur Andersen. That was the accounting firm at the center of the Enron scandal. This guy is like scandal, you know.
Scandal, yes, scandal contaminated, right?
Yeah. He's the guy you call when you want to have a scandal.
Yes, or he's the guy who, if you want to hire a team of virtual prisoners to be tracked with artificial intelligence through a crime scene, he's the go-to guy, isn't he? Because SERCO... Go ahead.
But that's another scandal. Why did they give him this most excellent order of the British Empire if he was sitting atop SERCO during a massive scandal? Why is he awarded for that?
Well, I don't know the exact time he got that award, right? But remember, when you're into black propaganda, if you're into black propaganda, you might be getting rewards because from the British Empire's point of view, or the intellectual elite and world bankers' point of view, you've done a great job because you convinced the world that the man that never was didn't happen. So, for example, in World War II, a Major Martin, who was a tramp or whatever it was, who had committed suicide by chewing into rat poison, he was turned into Major Martin, dressed up in a Marine uniform, and floated ashore to be picked up by the Spanish or the Portuguese Nazi-friendly people. And he had the instructions that the invasion or the information that the attack on the soft underbelly of Europe would be in Greece and not Sicily. So this percolated up to the German High Command, listened to, incidentally, by Ultra, and, right, the Enigma machine at Bletchley Park, so that the Brits knew that Hitler had bought into the theory that the attack would be in Greece.
Right.
So the Brits knew that there were 30,000 men moved to Greece, and they stayed there even though the attack was in Sicily. That was a classic double-cross operation, right? I believe that isn't that a marvelous? I want one of those.
I want one of these inflatable tanks and a backyard to put it in.
Yeah.
And then people could fly over and say, oh, the formation is in Jason's backyard.
But the essence of those attacks, the attack on Sicily and the attack in Normandy, was to hand off the decision-making apparatus or the intelligence apparatus of the Germans into the hands of the double agents in Britain, right? And a major part of that, I believe, was the faculty of fraud associated with the BBC. That is to say, the graduates of the philosophy, politics, and economics program at Oxford University started in 1922, and the Rhodes Scholars associated with the program run by N.M. Rothschild since 1902. And of course, the key player there is Bill Clinton. Basically, he went to Oxford and he studied 1 year in philosophy, politics, and economics, which in my book, I'm being an arrogant engineer here, means that Bill Clinton is technically and scientifically illiterate. Because if you study philosophy, politics, and economics, you're looking not at a science, but the art of politics, the art of power, the art of deception, right? So these people have infiltrated the BBC and the high command of the British government, and then they've gone around the world, right? And there are people planted within the United States command and control system who read PPE, right? Or are Rhodes Scholars, such as Bruce Reed. And Bruce Reed, I just noticed there's been endless shootings in Chicago, right? Well, that's the legacy of the Democrat mayor Rahm Emanuel, who wrote a book with Bruce Reed on, Great Principles or something? So Bruce Reed and Rahm Emanuel have run Chicago and the state of Illinois into the ground on the Federal Bridge using black propaganda.
Well, and they've handed it off to Lori Lightfoot, who's doing a wonderful job of destroying it as well. Last night, under the cover of darkness, or very early this morning or whatever, the mayor of Chicago decided to just remove this Christopher Columbus statue from various parks in Chicago, basically doing what the rioters have been wanting to do. She also appears in this Twitter photo with an outlaw mask on her face. Even if you have to wear a mask outside, I don't know why all these politicians have chosen to mask themselves in Twitter. Be safe, Chicago. This mask is not bulletproof. I don't know what the hell this
it's pathetic. It's amateurish, and it's it's pathetic. It's amateurish, and these people do not believe in Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, the slogan is basically a slogan that is misleading, because for these people, Black lives doesn't matter. I mean, ask Susan Rice.
Well, there's a ton of black people being shot every week in Chicago. Exactly. If Black Lives Matter, she should be spending resources, time, and money on stopping that. I don't think Christopher Columbus has hurt anybody for like 500 years.
Exactly. And when you destroy your past, you basically, what is that phrase? If you forget your past, you're condemned to relive it, right?
Right.
And so these statues, I believe they should be placed in for study by young people. Christopher Columbus did what? Is there anything that he did good? Is there anything he did bad?
I need to pause you for a second, David, because we're almost out of time, and we need just a couple of minutes to make our transition over to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. and subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. There's a couple things that we wanted to show people that we can't really do on YouTube without being attacked by the various trolls who are even emailing me right now, David, as we're live on air. I've taken a lot of steps to frustrate their ability to interrupt the show, and I think they've been quite effective. Couldn't take those steps without the generous support of our sponsors. So I look forward to seeing everybody in less than 5 minutes on Patreon and Subscribestar. And if you're new to the show, people can check out David's free website, reversecciscripts.com. He's got the free downloads on there. If you're curious about some of the patents we were speaking about earlier, you can just download this packet that David has put together for everybody who likes to follow along with the show. But David, I'll see you in just a few minutes now for the sponsor exclusive segment.
Thank you very much, Jason. Bye now.
Thanks for watching, everybody.